the haunting of the haunting of Hill House on Netflix. Wala, that your genre. Kindly just type no or yes if you did or did not. Some of you are leaving your microphones or leaving your ano laptop. Ayun. So not one from the class. Uh Shirley Jackson is very well known in American Lit. Actually, this is a story that's read before during our time. It's a story read by those who are in high school. So the first time I read this, I think actually I don't even think I was in high school the first time I read this. But yeah, if you look at the syllabus or the curriculum before, I remember the story of the lottery is actually part of the high school curriculum. So binabasa siya sa grade 8, grade 7 or grade 8. Anyway, let's talk about the lottery. What were your first thoughts when assigned to you the story? What were you thinking? What were your expectations? What ideas did you have when assigned the story? Be honest.
Sir, parang
Probably
maganda sa umpisa.
sa umpisa.
Parang
Maganda.
parang happy-happy yung barangay
Ayun.
nila, sir, ganun.
All right. So that's a nice observation. It seemed innocent, or it seemed like it's a chill story. Yes, earning money. Okay, what else? What part is that? We're actually pre-reading. So whenever someone is giving you something to read, like your teachers right now or in the next or in the coming years, you have to go over it a little bit. So try to see the length, try to see the title, right? Sometimes I try to scan it a little bit. So it's always good to start a habit of scanning something before you read it, okay? Because it will also alert you what you're supposed to focus on or what you're supposed to skip. Parang ganun. Okay. After going through it, the lottery is actually a short story that was published in the New Yorker. So the New Yorker is a magazine that is very well known in not just in the States but in the whole world because of its contribution to culture. So for example, when you talk about fashion, what's the best magazine or what is the most well-known magazine in terms of fashion? What do you think is like the Bible, quote and unquote, Bible of fashion? Yes, it's Vogue, right? And if you talk about fiction or if you talk about culture as in pop culture, it can be about film, ideas, news, mga ganon. New York Times, mga yon, Time Magazine, the New York Times, Newsweek. But if you also talk about feature and fiction, it's always the New Yorker. So the New Yorker is a very well-known publication. They usually run short stories. So most of the short stories that we are studying or that we know of and the most important writers they are publishing in the New Yorker. To share an experience, Shirley Jackson said that when the lottery came out, she actually had a baby. So she was pushing her stroller the time that she submitted her story to the lottery. Ano, so dinala niya sa may she brought the story to the mail, and she went to the postman, and when she went there she was greeted by the guard. A few weeks later, after her story came out, the guard she was walking the same path and the guard was not talking to her anymore. So there are many people who really hated her or who were pissed at her for the story that she wrote. It's the story of a peaceful small town America setting with a horrific and shocking ending. So the tone of her works are odd and macabre. That's not macabre. So when you say macabre, this is gothic, it's scary, it's horrific, with an impending sense of doom, often framed by very ordinary settings and characters. The time that when the New Yorker ran the story in 1948, it's reported to have generated more negative letters. And it was the first time that a short story has elicited a lot of letters. So, ang daming nagsulat nung time na yon. You have to imagine this is 1948. This is right after the war. You know, people are traditional, people are conservative. And then there's a story like the lottery that came out. Maraming na galit or na stress sa story or they were triggered. They even canceled their subscription to the magazine. They were offended by the work and the suggestion that evil can be easily and commonly carried out. So they felt that the stoning was a pointless and arbitrary, violent sacrifice. I have a question before I get to the next slide. What were can you share to me your feelings when you were reading it? Like especially when you were at the middle or when you were towards the latter part when it was clear what the story is all about or what's going to happen. Anybody? How's
Sir,
the feeling?
parang
Mm.
nakakairita yung si Tessie po.
Okay, so you
Yung
start
ugali
getting
niya.
pissed off. Okay, with her attitude. Okay, thank you. We'll get to that later on. Aside from Miss Cortez, how about the others? You can type some adjectives. How did you feel when you were towards the middle part, when you were starting to realize what the story is really about? You were shocked. What else? You know, I also remember the very first time I read this. Surprised. Totoo. What else? Curious. Oo din. Because when you read, you are tourism majors, but of course, fiction is for everybody. Literature is for everyone. I'm a lit major, so I love this. This is actually one of my favorite stories ever since I was in high school. That's why I also love to share it with my students right now. And when I used to when I used to prepare the modules and the lessons for senior high school for creative writing, I always include the lottery para mabasa nila. So yung mga nag-hum sa UB, I think nababasa nila yung the lottery. But that experience aside, when you read the story, it's always nice to give it a chance. And we'll talk about that later. So I also remember when I read that the first time I was covering my mouth because I was not sure about the ending. So I have to read it twice. And let's see, let's try to talk about the elements right now so that if there are some of you who are still confused, is someone here still confused? In my class yesterday, there was somebody who said, Sir, confused pa ako or I don't really know if I understood the story properly or not. So I walked him over I walked him and his classmates about the story yesterday, but they're from Stella. Okay naman, you feel like, and then don't worry, the story naman, that's why I was confident to give it to you or assign it to you, is because there are a lot already written online. There are many analyses online already. So I was going over your outputs actually. Yung iba sa inyo, yung iba sa, most of you actually, they have the same ideas or they have the same, it has the same idea or it has the same concept as those that are in the online analysis. Attendance checker, kindly screenshot now. So those who will enter the group later, they will be marked absent. Thank you. Okay, so the first publication, some people actually called to see where the town was so they could go and watch the lottery. And Shirley Jackson received over 300 letters that summer alone. I can only count around 13 that spoke kindly to me. Even my own mother scolded me. Dad and I never did not care at all for your story. The seem dear that this gloomy kind of story is what all you young people think about these days. Why don't you write something to cheer people up? Especially remember that this story came out during the war. Kaya medyo yung mga tao, yun nga, triggered and all. So, generally, she refused to explain the meaning of the story. And I also teach students this, especially in art appreciation, when you are artists or when you are poets or writers or performers. Sometimes when you do something, you have the right not to explain or not to tell us what the theme or what your presentation or your art is all about. Don't do that. You are not required or you are not obligated to explain the meaning of your art or your story. She did once tell a journalist, I hope by setting a particular brutal right in the present and in my own village to shock the readers with a graphic demonstration of the pointless violence and general inhumanity of their own lives. But I gather that in some cases, the mind just rebels. So the number of people who expected Mrs. Hutchinson to win a washer at the end were actually amazed. Ano? So let's go back to this later on. But today let's go over the story first. So if you look at the lottery, if you look at the story, the story of the lottery, it's actually quite simple at the first part. So I think you all remember the first part, and your classmate in here said that it feels good to read it. It didn't sound, or it didn't feel like it's going to be something that's going to be creepy or something that's horrific towards the end. And that's actually part of the powers of a writer. Okay, so they sometimes set up a certain idea and then they will reveal it right towards the end in a way that will shock us or make us not forget what the story is all about. So if you look at the story kasi, it was clear and sunny. So it was a full summer's day. So we just feel like it's gonna be a simple story. It's not going to really be shocking or anything. So you can see that there are people who are beginning to gather. So I think we all have the same experience, right? Or feeling when you were reading the story at the start, you feel like meron talagang lottery and then they're going to pick a winner, right? So
Yes.
what were your questions? What questions can you think about once you are at this port or portion? What are some questions you can ask yourself? Like, for example, I'll ask myself, what is the lottery about? Right? Add some questions. Or what is the prize of the winner? If it's a lottery, what prize will the winner get? Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have the same, Miss Cortez. How about the others? What prize will I get? Ano pa? You can also ask the rules, right? What are the rules of the lottery? How do we select the winner, right? Yeah. Hindi natin alam, so it was very curious, right? We didn't know what it's all about. So when you're reading, this is of course an activity about reading. So the story is just secondary. The fact that we enjoy the story is just secondary. The point of me giving you the story was for you to exercise your reading and for us to reflect right now how you went through the reading. So 'di ba, sometimes you have to ask your questions also once you go through a story. And once you start doing that, it just becomes natural. The more you read, the more you create questions, the more you ponder, and the more you become intelligent because you're able to question yourself and question the narrative, and you look for answers for it. So parang dito, no, parang napakasimple kasi napakasimple nung setup, 'di ba? So the way that Shirley Jackson told the story was very simple, and it was also very interesting because it's just a normal day, and people are gathering in the square because there is a lottery, and the lottery took 2 days and had to be started on June 2nd or 25th yata to, but in this village where there are only around 300 people, it will take 2 hours. So you already have an idea that the lottery is something that happens at many places at the same time or at the same dates. Okay, so you are starting to question, or you're starting to imagine talaga how it goes. And then the children assembled first, and then, di ba, did you observe something in here na very innocent but it will make sense later on? They were playing with, anong nilalaro nila? Ano nilalaro ng mga bata?
Bato, sir.
Stone.
Stones.
Bato. Totoo. So they were playing with rocks, they were playing with pebbles. So you are actually also it's not something to be curious about. You just feel like it's detail. But that's the beauty of short stories, especially the best written ones. Everything will make sense. Parang Harry Potter, if you are a Potterhead like me, some of the things that are very innocent or you don't think that they are supposed to have any purpose in book 2 or book 3 will eventually have meaning or use in book 5 or book 7. So, ang ganda, ang galing talaga nung writer. So, the way Shirley Jackson wrote this is to present something innocent first. So, she was just talking about this lottery, and then people are gathering, and everybody is invited into it. So, you have an idea that this is something that's really special because even the children are part of it. The children are part of it. Diba, sometimes if it's just a family day, sometimes men are not very interested or fathers. But in this certain event, in this lottery, that you only expect males or the fathers to be excited about it because it's money, everybody is really taking part into it. And they are spending a lot of time and energy and effort and consideration on how they're going to do it. So the lottery was conducted, as were the other events that they have, by Mr. Summers, who had time and energy to devote to civic activities. So, magkakaroon ka ng idea dito when you're going over the narrative or the story na this is really something that they are planning. And this is something that went on for many years. So it's a tradition, 'di ba? Yun yung nagpaganda sa story kasi traditional pala yung dating niya. Okay, so once you get through that, there are some details that are also explained here, like the paraphernalia for the lottery that had been lost long ago. So there's your black box, remember? And then what did you observe from the names, guys? What are the names that you remember? Did you not observe anything from the names? What did you observe? What are the names? Mention them. Or if you have your copy now, you can go over that. What's something interesting about the names? Old Man Warner, right? From the name itself, Old Man Warner. The names in the lottery are very meaningful. Warner from the verb warn, warning. So Old Man Warner, this is something that's going to he's the writer of the short story is warning us about him. Sabi niya itong pinakamatanda, traditional ito. Tapos Warner pa siya. About the others, what other names did you observe? Did you not observe anything? Hmm? Uy, may kusap ba ako? Wala pa. O so, sige, let's see later. Baka it will make more sense later once we figure out more details. So, there was actually, nakwento nila dito that there was actually a black box. The tradition, sabi nga dito, the tradition is represented by the black box. But the black box was already, was nasira. So they had to, it was shabby already. So they had a new one installed. And it was Mr. Martin who held the black box securely. And it's something that they really keep, something that they really treasure. Okay. So when they started, did you observe that it was just very simple? Like everybody was having fun. That's why you guys had no idea that something terrible was going to happen. Yes, exactly. There is Mr. Graves and there is Mr. Summers. So those are some interesting names, right? Graves meaning what? What does it mean? What do you think? Why Mr. Graves? Yes, Miss Camp. Puntod. Ay, sorry, naunahan ka nung nag-comment. May mamamatay exactly. So in just to add to your vocabulary, this is, you remember your literature, maybe your 21st century lit, do you remember, or junior high, do you remember the idea of foreshadowing? Foreshadowing is like a warning of, or it's a portion, or it's a line or a symbol or a word that is used by the, or an incident in the story that the writer put in order to warn you that something terrible is going to happen. So we are being foreshadowed actually on the first pa that something terrible will happen, but we don't observe that because we're reading something that's fun, that's interesting, no, like a lottery. And so when they did the lottery, yung may mga quotes dyan, ano, so they were talking about it na parang ano yun, excited sila, 'di ba? Mafe-feel mo yung excitement. And then you can feel that everybody is actually good-natured. So they are not even worrying, or they are not actually stressed about what the lottery will be. So I also, as a reader, I also feel what you have felt, that okay, there's nothing wrong about this story, that it's just going to be a lottery. So we're just curious about how it's going to be, right? And then they started. So they have to make sure that everybody is there. So you also have an idea, and they want to see if they want to be fair. They want to see if everybody will contribute. They want to give everybody a fair chance at winning this lottery. So there are some, it's a very beautiful introduction, or it's a very beautiful setup what the writer did. No, Shirley Jackson is an amazing short story writer by presenting first these details before giving us the gruesome twist towards the middle. And then makikita nyo rin yung rules. So you will be able to deduce the rules. You know the question that we asked a while ago, what are the rules of the lottery? So eto, yung meron yung Horace is not but 16 yet. Mrs. Dunbar said regretfully, guess I gotta fill in for the old man this year. So, nagtatanong sila, wala yung papa niya. So, sino ang magdodrolat? Sino ang bubunot? So, there were a lot of questions that are answered in the as we go on with the story. So, nasagot yung question natin yung about the rules of the lottery. So, we are becoming more and more curious about the question that we asked a while ago. What is the prize? What are we going to win? Diba? So, already, sabi ni Mr. Summers, and now I'll read the names, heads of families first. So, it's the head of the family who will actually go up and draw lots. So, you can see that it is in alphabetical order, right? Because the first name was Adams, and then, what are the other names in there? Yun, yung mga Dunbar, may Anderson, Bentham, Clark, Delacroix, Dunbar, Harbert, Hutchinson. And then yung sa Hutchinson, nagjo-joke pa si Mrs. Hutchinson. Kaya nga talagang wala tayong feeling that something ominous is going to happen because Mrs. Hutchinson said, "Get up there, Bill. Akyat ka na, be." Ganyan. Bunot ka na. So everybody was even laughing. So we had no idea what it's all about. And then as the story was progressing, the cloud is starting to come over us, right? It's starting to scare us because there's a part in there that says lottery in June, corn be heavy soon. Sabi niya, so kailangan natin mag-lottery para magkaroon tayo ng magandang ani so that we're going to have a good harvest. And then Mrs. Adams said, some places have already quit the lotteries. And Old Man Warner, the eldest man in the village, was angry about it. He said, "Pack of young fools, mga bobo," sabi niya. So, you also start to question, di ba? Parang bakit ayaw gawin ng ibang communities? Bakit si Old Man Warner, sinabi niyang hindi stupid yung mga fools, yung mga hindi nagtutuloy. And then 77th year I had been in the lottery, the Old Man Warner said. And then it shows that it cements the idea that this is something that's very traditional. Now, even before Old Man Warner was alive, this is something that's been going on. So this is something that's really part of their culture. So after that, there was a long pause, a breathless pause until Mr. Summers, so sinabi niyang, "All right, fellows, pwede nyo nang tignan yung mga papel ninyo." And the question is, do you remember the exact part in the short story where you felt that something terrible will happen? What particular part? Can someone point me to a paragraph or to a sentence? What particular part did you observe that something was terrible na? Kasi nung una, very innocent, di ba? It was actually fun. They were having fun. But what particular part was the one that alerted you? Yun. So it finally, thank you Von. Finally, you realize something because they don't want to pick or they don't want to win the lottery. So you start to question yourself. So ano garod? What's going to happen then? So after they did that, at first wala pa this part, diba? It was quite innocent. Who is it? Who's got it? Is it the Watsons? Is it the Dunbars? And then Bill Hutchinson's got it. And then lagi pinapatawag nila yung ibang tao. So you don't ka rin makikurious, ano ba yung mangyayari at bakit kailangan makita ng iba or kailangan sumali ng iba. So you started to have a paradigm shift once you got to the paragraph, this one, with the line that said, Tessie Hutchinson shouted to Mr. Summers, "You didn't give him time enough to take any paper he wanted. I saw you. It wasn't fair." Galit na siya. So, you can see Mrs. Delacroix was saying, "Be a good sport, Tessie," sabi niya. And Mrs. Graves said, "All of us took the same chance." Sabi niya, "Ano ka ba, girl? Ganyan. Pumili tayo ng maayos." Ayaw, di ba parang kung may prize sana, kung may premiere yung lottery, dapat pag-aagawan pa nila kung may second chance, edi matutuwa pa sila. But it looks like the winner, eventually the winner, Bill Hutchinson, the family of Bill doesn't want to win, and the others do not want to get it either. They don't want to win the thing. So, after that, yun, makit na sila. Now, I have a question for you. Diba, there's a part in the short story where they're supposed to pick first the head of the family. And after the head of the family were supposed to pick, they're all going up, right? The father, the mother, and the kids. And what's something that bothered you in this scene? Especially those who are saying that Mrs. Hutchinson is nakakairita. What particular part or what made you not like her, or what was something that you observed which was quite different or weird? What particular part do you think? Okay, did you see that already? Ayan, so there are many ideas here now. Like, ayaw niya mabunot, yung nagagalit na siya agad, takot na takot siyang buksan yung nabunot. Ayun, Nisperos was the one who highlighted it again. Willing siyang ipahamak sila. And yun, and also the same with Villanueva. Parang gusto niyang madami silang magdodoro at gusto po niyang ma-harm yung ibang members ng family niya, which is actually true. And that's what's actually terrible about this story, because this will actually, when you are reading this the first time, you do not know what's going to happen. It will make you very curious. Bakit, di ba, nanay siya? Tessie Hutchinson is the mom. And you know, even if you're a guy, you know, as long as you're a parent, or actually kahit pa nga kuya ka, di ba mukhang Hunger Games, you would want to sacrifice yourself, right? It's so weird because Tessie Hutchinson was willing to sacrifice her kids. That's why there's a part there that said, Bill, you draw for the Hutchinson family. Meron pa ba kayong ibang members? Sabi niya. Meron si Don at si Eva. Sabi ni Mrs. Hutchinson, nanay mismo nagsabi na, yung anak, meron pa akong isang anak, pwede rin yun, ganon. And then, they said, daughters draw with their families, Tessie. Mr. Summers said gently, you know that as well as anyone else. It wasn't fair, Tessie said. And so, you can see how terrible the story is about, because, you know, you are a mother, and usually, right, like, try to, what are some questions you can ask yourself? Ako, for example, I also ask myself when I read this story, like, what would I have done? Or if I was part of the lottery and then my family got picked, I think it would be like Hunger Games. Don't you agree? You will be like Katniss Everdeen, and you will be saying, I volunteer, and then ako na lang po yung ako na lang yung manalo, ako na lang yung i-sacrifice nyo sa lottery, hindi yung nanay ko o yung tatay ko o yung mga kapatid ko. Something as dramatic as that. But you can see that the story is shaped differently. Ibang klaseng tao sila. Iba yung idea nila, or iba sila. So kahit yung anak niya willing niyang i-sacrifice. So ayun, they continued to what's this, to do the drawlats. And then when they did that, you can see here also, sometimes when you are reading, this is part of critical reading, you have to be very careful also about the words that are being used. This is what we call diction. So diction refers to the choice of words. So if you look at the diction of the story, how many kids, Bill? Mr. Summers asked formally. This is a small town, right? Sinabi nga niya kanina 300 parang 300 lang sila doon. So everybody knows everybody. Kilala nila, magkaka-chismisan sila, magkakaibigan sila. Pero si Mr. Summers, nag-iba na siya. Alam mo yung parang tayo din, like as your teacher, I am quite, of course, when we are chatting in the GC sometimes off hours, we are friendly and we talk about other stuff. But when we are already inside the classroom and then it's time for the lecture, we cut down on the jokes and we try to discuss more. We try to discuss muna because 1 hour lang ang synchronous natin, parang ganon. So we try to become formal. And it's the same thing here, like they are nagchichismisan sila even before that, but Mr. Summers suddenly became formal, and then kunwaring hindi niya alam kung ilan ang anak ni Bill. So Bill said, I have three. So there's Bill, Bill Jr., Nancy, and there's the bunso, little Dave, and then Tessie and him. So all right then, Mr. Summers said, Harry, get your tickets back. So all of their tickets are in, but even the one with the mark. And then Mrs. Hutchinson is still, angry about it, saying, it wasn't fair. Let's do this again. Everybody saw that, but no one was paying attention because, of course, no one wanted to do it again because malay mo, the second time they do it, biglang ikaw yung mabunot. So Mr. Graves had selected the 5 slips and put them in the box. And then even Mrs. Hutchinson is already desperate. So she was saying, listen everybody, but nobody was listening to her because they don't want to win the lottery. They wanted to be anyone from her family, not theirs. So kumuha sila, and you can see just how innocent this is. The thing about being a victim is that you are not chosen, and it's yun yung pinakamasama, yun yung pinakamalungkot when we are victims of situations like, kaya nga 'di ba pag may example lang, but just a rhetorical situation. If somebody is murdered but he is a drug addict or drug user or a drug lord or a seller or a vendor, sometimes you don't feel the same kind of sympathy as a person who was just walking on the street in the dead of the night, and yung term natin na ano lang na tsempuhan lang, and then they killed him. It's a stranger on stranger violence, and we feel bad about that. It's the same thing when someone is killed but the person is older and you know that the person is quite sinful compared to someone who is innocent, someone who is young. And it's the same thing in this narrative, like the kids are actually kids, they are innocent, they don't know anything about it yet, they just know that there was a lottery, although yung iba, yung ate at kuya mas matanda, so alam nila. But you can see Davey put his hand into the box and laughed. Nakikipag-joke pa siya nung kumukuha siya ng papel. Hindi niya alam na, iho, kung magkamali ka tapos yung mabunot mo yung may black mark, mamamatay ka. So the child was very innocent. So it shows that this kind of ceremony, this lottery, doesn't actually, choose or select any victim at all. Everybody is prone, or everybody has a chance to it, no? Fair chance, kahit na bata ka pa or kahit na mabait ka. Ano pa, 'di ba? Binuhat pa si Dave. So Nancy got it, and then there was even a girl who said, I hope it's not Nancy. Alay, sana hindi yung friend natin, parang ganon. So it's actually quite it's actually scary, It's actually quite weird how the story went. And then, all right, Mr. Summers said, open the papers. Harry, you open little Dave's. Mr. Graves opened the slip of the paper, and there was a general sigh through the crowd as he held it up, and everyone could see that it was blank. Natuwa sila na hindi yung bata, parang ganun. Hay, buti na lang hindi yung bata. As if naman daw hindi ganun kalala yung next na mangyayari. Nancy and Bill opened theirs at the same time, and both beamed and laughed. So they were happy. They were saying, "Yay, di kami yung nabunod," something like that. So they were actually happy that they were not the ones picked. And then Tessie, Mr. Summers said, there was a pause, and then Mr. Summers looked at Bill Hutchinson, and Bill unfolded his paper and showed it. It was blank. It's Tessie, Mr. Summers said. And this is the part that I want you to observe. Again, in terms of diction, when you're doing critical reading, every word counts. Mr. Summers said, and his voice was hushed. Show us her paper, Bill. Now look at this part also. Bill Hutchinson went over to his wife and forced the slip of paper out of her hand. Alam mo yon? Bill, that's your wife. Like, Bill, asawa mo yan. Ano mo yon? Ginawa mo din yan. Nanay yan ng mga anak mo. And technically, you're supposed to be her protector and then you love her. But look at what the lottery did to them. Hindi niya hiningi yung papel, di ba? Hindi parang Han or Tessie, can you just give me the paper? No, there was no pleading, there was no niceties about it. Anong ginawa niya? He forced the slip of paper out of her hand. And you can see the black spot on it, the black spot that Mr. Summers had made the night before with a heavy pencil in the coal company office. Bill Hutchinson held it up and there was a stare in the crowd. All right, folks, Mr. Summers said, let's finish quickly. Although the villagers had forgotten the ritual and lost the original black box, they still remembered to use stones. The pile of stones the boys had made earlier was ready, so now it makes sense bakit may mga bato. There were stones on the ground with the blowing scraps of paper that had come out of the box. Delacroix selected a stone so large, she had to pick it up with both hands and turn to Mrs. Dunbar. Come on, she said, hurry up. Delacroix and Dunbar were her friends, right? They were talking with Tessie earlier in the story. And now, imagine yourself, like you are friends ha, kunwari close friends si Villanueva at Andrada. At saka nabunot si Andrada, parang sabi ni Villanueva, halika na, kuha na tayo ng bato, tatamaan natin si Beshi, parang ganon. So just imagine how terrible it is. So even I don't know, it's so weird. Delacroix selected a stone so large, she had to pick it up with both hands. Kulang, hindi ka na tatamaan mo yung kaibigan mo. Naghanap ka pa talaga ng malaking batong ipupukpok sa kaibigan mo. So Mr. Dunbar had small stones in both hands and she said, gasping for breath, I can't run at all. You'll have to go ahead and I'll catch up with you. The children had stones already and someone gave the son of Tessie, Davy Hutchinson, a few pebbles. So ayan, pantama mo sa mami mo. Tessie Hutchinson was in the center and it's now a cleared space by now. She held her hands out desperately as the villagers moved in on her. It isn't fair, she said. A stone hit her on the side of the head. Old Man Warner was saying, come on, everyone. Steve Adams was in front of the crowd of villagers and Mrs. Graves beside him. It isn't fair, it isn't right, Mrs. Hutchinson screamed. And then they were upon her. So, ayun. That was the story. So terrible. Like, I can see Miss Torres' photo right now here in Google Meet. That's how I think that's how we looked like when we read the story. It was shocking. It was weird, you know. It's an unforgettable short story because of its theme. So ayan, so the horrible actions exhibited in groups, such as the stoning, do not take place on the individual level. For individually, such action would be called murder. So anong ginawa nila? Everybody takes part in it. Diba parang sometimes when you do something bad, it feels better or it feels lesser if many of you take part in it. So pag isang tao, pinatay niya yung isang tao, parang murder. But if everyone does it, yun nga, like death penalties, the same idea in death penalty, it feels better. On the group level, people classify their atrocious acts simply as ritual. So when Mrs. Hutchinson arrives at the ceremony late, she chats sociably with Mrs. Delacroix. But after Mrs. Hutchinson falls victim to the lottery selection, Delacroix chooses a stone so large that she has to pick it with both hands. So the two women regard each other as friends, but on the group level, they will betray that relationship and satisfy the mob mentality. So there are some symbols, very important. Black, of course, is the color of death, mourning, punishment, and the black box is used for draw lots with a black mark. All represent the idea of death and punishment. There was the black box, which also looks like a coffin, and the black spot on the paper, which is like, you know, it means that you are unclean, parang negative siya, kasi hindi siya red or anything, it's black. So the black box is old, the paint is peeling, and the wood is splintered. So it represents the tradition, the fading of the tradition in other villages. Kaya nasisira yung black box kasi yung tradition na ito, di ba we've been talking about culture and tradition, it's something that's also fading. Kaya yung ibang mga communities din na nila ginagawa. However, they will not replace the box, just like they will not stop the lottery. So another symbolism is the lottery symbolize any number of social problems that we blindly continue even though they are outdated. The setting is anywhere in the States, which is actually scarier because it means it can happen to anyone, everywhere. And this was the names, what I was saying. So summers is the season of summer, of course. It's associated with youth, with the prime of life, blossoming, blooming, the harvest. And graves is an obvious grave, a place of entombment or death. So grave is serious. It hints that the lottery is a frivolous contest. Critics have said that Jackson creates balance by naming the other characters Summers and Graves because there's a sharing of the responsibility in the ritual. Life brings death, and death will recycle life. So many believe that the lottery is a modern day parable, a story that presents a moral lesson through the characters who represent these ideas. Okay, so what are the themes from the story? Acts of violence, hatred, murder are not acceptable just because many people participate. Okay, so sometimes that's why there's a very huge debate about abortion, for example, about death penalty, about capital punishment, because this is also considered murder. But just at what point is this acceptable? But sometimes, even when you do this, parang nagiging okay tuloy siya kasi marami tayong nag-usap about it. Society is reluctant to reject outdated traditions. So there are many traditions. What are other, I think you're in NSTP, right? You are talking about Filipino values also, in NSTP 1 and in your philo class, ethics. Di ba meron yung tinatawag natin, kayo din online, toxic Filipino culture. So there are also other traditions that we need to reject. People are not all good or all evil, but a mixture of both. So parang si Mrs. Delacroix kanina, di ba? Kaibigan mo pero kaya mong traidorin. So we can all be good and we can also be all evil. Horrifying acts of violence can take place anywhere at any time. Following the crowd can have disastrous consequences. The unexamined life is not worth living, and many more ideas or themes can be applied to the lottery. All right, so those are the ideas. I hope that you had the. I hope that you had you had more ideas into it, like the way that you read it, you were able to practice. I just wanted you to reflect on the way that you practice reading or critical reading. So when you become a critical reader, just to close our session, prepare to become part of the writer's audience. So pag may binibigay sa inyo, lalo na kasi estudyante tayo, we don't really have power. I'm also a student like you right now. So if the teacher says or the professor says, okay, you have to read this book and we'll talk about it in 2 weeks, you have to read the book in 2 weeks because you have to give it a chance because it's already given to you. That means number two, you have to read with an open mind. Do not say, I'm just reading this because it's required. You also have to give it a chance. I'm reading this because maybe there's something that the teacher wanted me to understand from it. Consider the title, which we did a while ago. Read slowly so that you can see the diction, you can see the symbols, etc. Using of the dictionary and other appropriate reference works. When I read, actually, I'm just sharing my personal tip. I don't actually look at the dictionary agad unless it is important or it's very essential. What I do is I underline them first or I write here on the margins and then I will consult the dictionary later on. So that's how I take notes or that's how I look or remember words that I do not know. Okay, that you can also do that. I think everybody has some skills or has some technique in memorizing or reviewing. Of course, you have to make notes and try to keep a reading journal. Okay, text features. So text features, of course, comparison and contrast, like Mr. Graves and Mr. Summers. Um, Sometimes we are able to understand something because we know that they are not the same or because they are the same, right? Descriptive pattern, like the very first part of the story is very descriptive. So you had no idea that it's going to be bad. The morning was clear and sunny. There was a fresh warmth of a full summer day. The flowers were blossoming profusely, the grass was richly green, everybody was out there. So you had no idea that it's actually negative. So that's descriptive pattern. Episode pattern will be when you're going to focus on certain episodes or certain parts. Like episodic here in this story will be, I remember the part where they are talking. Just as Mr. Summers finally left off talking, Mrs. Hutchinson came hurriedly along the path to the square, her sweater thrown down, etc., etc. So this discussion is about is and it's an example of episodic pattern because it tries to show us some particular parts in the story, episodes, if you will. Um, time sequence, of course. Time sequences, of course. Wait, can you give me a few? Can you give me a few minutes? Hello. Yes po. Ano ba yan? Okay, I'm so sorry. So the next one is time sequence. Of course, when you talk about time sequence, you can talk about the chronology of events, which started first, which led to this part, which led to that part, etc. You also have your process and cause and effect. There's what we call a process analysis. Process analysis is usually used by your department, IHTM. Hindi nyo lang napapansin or hindi nyo alam ang tawag doon. That's process analysis. Process analysis is when you write and then you give the steps and then you explain the steps. So, cooking, for example, when you cook, right, you're going to write down the instructions. That's a process analysis. Example, you heat the pan, do this so that etc etc parang ganon. So that's an example of process analysis, right? Cause and effect also, so that you will know what is happening and what happened, what caused it, what effect will it have, etc. General to specific, very common. So this is what we call deductive. So you give a very huge image, just like the lottery. Ang ganda nung deduction niya. You talk about all of the people first, the crowd, and then you focus on someone, on a member lang. Diba? Did you observe that? So that's an example of general to specific. So madaming tao sa community, pero episodic siya, so in-specify lang din niya. Let's specify or focus our story on Tessie Hutchinson only. So in terms of reading strategies, of course, I hope that these are what you did, just a reflection, try to observe yourselves. Previewing, did you ever go over the title first? Like sometimes these are ano naman, I'm not saying that you should really have a checklist, but eventually it will come naturally once you get used to it. So pag sanay na kayo nagbabasa and you're able to read critically, it's already natural eh. So you open a book and then you look at the title and the content, that's previewing. You look at the length, mahaba ba siya, paano ko to hahatiin. I don't know if you're doing that. So for example, if I also start reading a book like a novel, I sort of get an idea how I'm going to cut it. So I want to read this novel, so I'm going to read, there are 30 chapters or there are 300 pages. Maybe I can read the first 150 today, 151 to 300 tomorrow, and then 301 to 450 the next day. So you also start planning or you also start previewing based on length. Reading for main ideas, this is what you do when you are rushing or when there is a very large chunk of data or narrative and you only have to look for the keywords or the important parts. That's when you read for main ideas. Using context clues for vocabulary, of course, context clues are very important, right? I'll show you a video later. Once we're finished, we'll get back to this. And scanning for details. So, minsan, lalo na kayo, pag nagra-rush kayo, when you are reviewing, you just go over the key parts, tingnan nyo lang yung short na description. Pag meron kayong essay assignment, kukunin nyo lang yung importante. And you also make inferences. So this is when you make your conclusions, which is part of your activity later, which will lead you to drawing conclusions. So inferences meaning what are the themes, ideas, concepts, opinions, thoughts that you can make or that you can call or get from this narrative or this story or this text or this essay or this article, and you will draw conclusions from it. Okay. So a critical reader, to end this, does not believe everything she reads, question everything that doesn't make sense. You question some things even though they do make sense to you. Reread when you think that you have missed something. You carefully consider the type of material you are reading before deciding how much weight to give to it. Totoo ito. So sometimes even as a student, I also did that. So I was also like you before. So for example, if there are 3 exams today, ano ang unahin ko dito? So unahin ko yung kung ano yung parang pinakamahirap. So there are people, for some people it will work na yung mas madali. But for me personally, I prefer to work on something that's more difficult. So for example, you study first your math class, and then you go to your science, and then you go to your porpcom because you're good at porpcom, something like that. Or if if you are not very good in English, or if you have a difficult teacher that can also be a factor, di ba? Pag yung teacher mo sa English mahirap magpa-exam or mahirap magpa-quiz, unahin mo na, yun na yung re-reviewin mo. Pero alam mo yung teacher mo sa art up, hindi naman siya ganun ka-stressful or chill lang naman. So you don't spend more time on it because you know that the teacher in this subject would give more. So those are different factors that can also affect the way that you review or the way that you read, right? You will decide how much weight. You are aware of your own assumptions and biases. Halimbawa ako, my bias is on gender. So when I read an essay and when I read an essay and someone is judgmental, parang masarap bigyan ng 0. So I am aware of that. So if the subject is porpcom and I need to check the grammar only, I still give a good score to the student even if I disagree with the student's view on gender. So you need to know your biases so that you become objective. Admit that the effect on you of what the writer says may be caused more by the style of writing than by the facts presented. So sometimes naniniwala tayo kasi maganda yung pagkasulat, tama? Analyze arguments, discount argument based on faulty reasoning, and you can state good reasons for believing some things and disbelieving others. So you need also to know how to agree and disagree with something. Before we end, I would just like to show you a short video. No hate ito just to show you a sample about context clues. Alam mo yung nagra-rush tayo tas meron ka pang
program. Actually, you know what?
International 2016 ni Jeff Fernandez.
Lang na 2018 binibining Pilipinas pageant. Ayon kay Kylie, level up at mas mahirap ang tanungan ngayong taon kumpara sa nakaraang pageants ng binibini.
I have to say na yung questions mga binibini were more difficult this year. I have to say, parang mas mahirap and it wasn't a fair.
Tapat sa kanyang katanungan.
I appreciated her answer. I appreciated her honesty.
At nagbigay tip pa si Kylie na kung sa kanya natapat ang ganitong katanungan, ito ang kanyang gagawin.
Feel ko, siguro magka-context clues na lang ako, build. Siguro I'll say something about the economy and how we can improve building it. If we build more, then we can help the economy more. I would use context clues.
Oh, did you get that? So just a little sharing, especially because pageant Q&As are very difficult. They're actually symbolic of our other situations like job interviews, classroom recitations. They are very much like pageant Q&As that are very difficult to handle sometimes. So if you have questions, kindly post it in Google Classroom. I'll be posting in Messenger. I'll be posting in Messenger your output or your question for today's activity that you can see, which is due on Friday. And I'll also meet you for a short synchronous on Friday again. So please be ready on Friday for a short synchronous. Mga siguro around 20 minutes. So 20 to 30 minutes. So see you then. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye, sir. Thank you, sir.
Goodbye, sir. Thank you po.
Sir.